Hi, my name's Matt and I'd like to welcome you to this Zindiac video, which is part of our MOR Management of Risk Foundation training course. In this video, we will be looking at the risk management strategy. And the purpose of the risk management strategy is to describe specific risk management activities for a particular organisational activity, be that project, programme or operational area. And it does this by defining the risk appetite for the activity expressed using tolerance thresholds for probability and impact. So for instance, for a project, we might have a situation where the risk tolerance for probability is high and below, that is high, medium, low and very low, but the risk tolerance for impact is medium and below. So medium, low and very low, they're all within tolerance, but if the impact is high or very high, we need to escalate it. If the probability is very high, we need to escalate it. Now obviously you don't have to use those limits, but that would be an example for a particular project if we're using the 5-point scale from very low to very high. It's important that the risk management strategy is established when planning any activity. So if you're following Prince 2, the risk management strategy for the project will be created during the initiation phase, during the initiating a project process. And in fact, if you are following Prince 2 6th edition, the latest edition released in 2017, they actually talk about the risk management approach rather than the risk management strategy. And the reason for that is they recognise that very often what we're doing is taking the risk management strategy for all projects within our organisation and tweaking it a bit if necessary. So we may just take the standard risk management strategy and that becomes our approach, or we may take the risk management strategy and tweak it a bit and that becomes our approach. But either way, whether we tweak it or just take it as is, we're not writing it from scratch generally. We're now going to look at some key concepts related to the risk management strategy, and we're going to start with scales for estimating probability and impact. As I've said before, there's really two ways of doing it. One's qualitatively and one's quantitatively. So qualitatively is where we use our knowledge and experience to estimate the likelihood and the impact, and we may express them on 5-point scale, so likelihood or probability from very likely through likely, neither likely or unlikely, unlikely and very unlikely, the 5-point scale, and then impact has been very high, high, medium, low and very low. So a simple 5-point scale. If we have data, if we have quantifiable data, then we can express the probability and impact using numbers. So we can say that the probability is 76%. If we have data to back that up that shows historically that is the probability we see for this particular risk, and impact we can express as a financial value, 5 million, 10 million. But again, if we have the data to back that up. The next concept we need to consider is risk categories. And the first thing to say about categorization is the reason we categorize anything is to make things easier to manage. So the trick is always with categorization to have a few categories that make things easier to understand, but not so many categories that it makes things more difficult to understand because no one knows where things are, basically, in which category things fit. And in terms of risk management, really, risk categories form a simple checklist so that we can think about, for instance, the examples on the slide, health and safety. What health and safety risk can we identify? What financial risk? What IT risk? What environmental risk? And we may have some risks in some of those categories that apply to all projects or all programs or all operational activities, or certainly within a particular domain. So helpful for categorizing it, helpful for managing the risks and being able to find them quicker rather than simply using a risk ID, but also helpful as a checklist for identifying risks. We've talked about risk appetite before, but in terms of the risk management strategy, it is important that we express the risk appetite for the particular organisational activity. And because the risk management strategy is effectively the senior approach document for the activity, because the risk management policy and the risk management process guide apply to the organisation as a whole, this is the logical document where we would put the risk appetite for the activity. And I can see that coming up. It's kind of an easy exam question to write, but it is something that they would want you to know. It shows understanding of where the approach documents sit and the hierarchy of them. So the risk appetite for the activity will be documented in the risk management strategy and could be expressed as a percentage perhaps of the budget. So it might be 5-10% of the total project costs is the risk appetite, and that might also be expressed as a contingency in that the organisation puts that money aside or allocates that money for contingency should the threats impact. We also need risk tolerance thresholds for the activity, as we've talked about, where particularly with probability and impact, where we escalate them to a higher level. So a key point about the difference between risk appetite and risk tolerances. Risk tolerances tend to apply to individual risks. So if an individual risk exceeds a tolerance either in terms of probability or impact, we would have to escalate it. And remember, that could apply to opportunities just as much as threats. If there is an opportunity that is going to have a very high impact and is perhaps very likely to occur, it's quite possible it would need to be escalated because senior management would want to take more interest in it and make sure it does happen if it's going to have a big positive impact. So it can apply to opportunities as well as threats. Whereas when we talk about risk appetite, we tend to be talking about the totality of risk to the activity. So our risk appetite is 10% of budget. If the totality of risk impact is estimated to be more than 10%, then we would need to escalate that to senior management. And that might be expressed as a net figure, i.e. if 10% was £1 million and we've got £1.5 million of threat, but £700,000 of opportunity, the net figure would be £800,000 of threat, which would be inside the risk appetite. But we need to make that clear. Is that what we mean, or is it just we don't care what the opportunities are? If the threat is over £1 million, it's beyond our risk appetite. If the opportunities are over £500,000, it's beyond our risk appetite, and maybe we don't run it as a project, or we take those opportunities out and do something different. The risk management strategy needs to be clear, unambiguous about what we're talking about. So those sorts of differences, you need to be able to go to your risk management strategy and read it and understand, oh yeah, right, this is what we're doing. This is our rules that we're following. And finally, as always, roles and responsibilities, and there are some example roles listed on the slide, but they are not a comprehensive list. So really any roles within our organisational activity that are key to the management of risk need to be documented and their responsibilities documented as well. Right, so that brings us to the end of this video on the risk management strategy. Please join me in the next video where we'll be talking about the risk register. Until then, have a great day.